All right. Well, good morning. Welcome to our morning devotions. This is episode 169. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 30, and I posted verses 1 through 10 and 16 through 19, which is David's recovery of Ziklag, and that's what I called this, the title, Recovering Ziklag. And I've been gone up visiting the family for a couple of days, so I missed a couple of days. I had some inquiry about if everything was okay, and everything's fine. But yeah, we're home, as you can see, and we're looking into 1 Samuel chapter 30. And the first 10 verses of the chapter are in regards to the Amalekites attacking Ziklag when David and his men were away and carrying away everything. The first 10 verses. They take away their women, their kids, the children. They take away all their property. They ransack Ziklag and they carry it all away. So when the men get back to their town and they're expecting, a reunion, the place is empty. And so that's in the first 10 verses. Matter of fact, it is so terrible because they are grieving the loss of everyone. He's got 600 men and their families staying in Ziklag, and when he gets home, I mean, everybody's gone. They've been taken. Matter of fact, it gets so bad here in verse 6. It says, "And David was greatly distressed. He said, for the people spake of stoning him." This is just a knee-jerk reaction to the anxiety and the terrible pain they're experiencing for the loss of their families. I mean, everything is missing. They are destitute. Their families are gone. And and right now they don't know what to do in these first 10 verses. So it says, in the remainder of verse 6, it says, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and for his daughters. See, their sons and daughters are gone. Their families have been taken from them. It says, but David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. That is, basically, this is just an expression of trust in a time of great distress, that he encouraged himself in the Lord. He knew that the Lord was in control of all these things, and he encouraged himself in the Lord, which is a good example for all of us, that when times get tough and we can't really see the other end of the tunnel, dark days, that we can encourage ourselves in the Lord. We can remind ourselves of God's faithfulness through the ages, especially in our lives. We can look at the way God has blessed historically in God's word, but we can see how he has watched over us year after year, moment after moment in our lives, not only caring for us as individuals, but for our families, and really we're just leaning on God's faithfulness. And this is what David is doing. He knows how God has protected him through very difficult times. And so even in the midst of this trial, he's encouraging himself in the Lord. And he does something here that I think we all need to practice. I think this is one of the key elements of this passage, because in times of distress, we think we know exactly what we should do, and sometimes we go about what we think we should do like it's almost the inevitable thing. We see the inevitable thing because this is the only path to take because of our perspective of the situation. But in this passage of Scripture, which has always impressed me, is that David, even though the inevitable thing would just take his men and go chase these guys down, David does not do that. He stops and he pauses and he asks God for help. That is, even when we see the inevitable, that this looks like the only thing to do is now we have to arm ourselves and chase down whoever did this to see if we can get our families back. Hypothetically, God might have had a different plan. He might have said, no, just sit still. This is hypothetically. Just sit still. I'm taking care of this for you, because this is the way God does things. But David wants to know exactly what to do. So he's in a crucible. He's in a great test. His men want to stone him. Everybody's families are gone. If you can imagine the anxiety that they're feeling, the heart brokenness that they're feeling. I mean, the emptiness that they're feeling. I mean, they're, so to speak, at the bottom of the emotional barrel here. What are we going to do, these grown men? And then it says this in verse 7, which is crucial to this whole discussion. It says in verse 7, and David said to Abiathar the priest, he says, Ahimelech's son, I pray thee, bring me hither the ephod. And Abiathar brought forth the ephod to David. And David inquired at the Lord, saying, shall I pursue after the troop? So he asks whether or not he should do what to me was the inevitable and what's most conspicuous. He's asking, should I chase down the people that took my family? All right, rather than just running off and doing it. You would think that this would be just something that you did, but he doesn't. He asks, should I chase them down? Shall I overtake them? And he answered him, that is, Abiathar answered him as the priest, speaking for God, pursue, for thou shalt surely overtake them, and without fail recover all. And there it is. God tells him that you're going to get everything back. Earlier in chapter 30, it says that no one was killed. They took him for spoil. So none of the kids, none of the wives, none of the property was killed. They just took it. All right. So when it says you're going to recover all, that is, you're going to recover everything alive. And we're going to see that because these Amalekites have been raiding all over the area, when the spoil or when their families are recovered, there's going to be stuff that has been taken from all kinds of people that David's also going to take from the Amalekites. So David went, he and his 600 men that were with him, and came to the brook Bozor, where those that were left behind stayed. Now, 200 are going to stay behind, and this is going to be a rub later in this chapter, because 400 of the 600 are going to go and fight the Amalekites. 200, for the sake of being weary or other reasons, don't go. And the people, the men, because they call them men of Belial, because the men that are following David are not saints. These are not saints, the men that are following David. He said they're going to decide that only those that actually went and fought for the spoil should divide the spoil. And David said, we're not doing that. Everybody that's in the crew, all 600, are going to evenly divide the spoil, whether you actually went to fight or not. And later on in the text, it says that this turned out to be a regular practice in Israel. This was the way things were managed. Whether you were in the battle or not, as part as you were, if you were in the army, then you got a benefit of the victory. So it says, but David pursued, he and 400 men, and 200 abode behind, which were so faint that they could not go over the brook Bezor. That is, he's got some with him that just can't keep up, is basically of the 600. So of the 600, you got 200 that can't keep up, and you got 400 guys that are just pressing forward. And this is going to be the rub, all right, later on in the chapter. And so then you get to verse 11 through 14, or 15, which I'm not going to develop. But they run across an Egyptian slave that because he was sick, the Amalekites left behind. So they just left him behind to die, basically. They don't realize that he is going to be a point man, this sick Egyptian, to tell David where the Amalekites are. That's what happens. They left someone behind that didn't think he was of any value, but this one witness, this one man that knows where the Amalekites are doing and where they've been, because he gives a testimony to David. He tells him right here that they burned Ziklag with fire. That is, they went to Ziklag too. So David knows from the testimony of this Egyptian that these are the guys that took your family. All right, one voice. This is like Doeg. He was one voice for Saul. It brought about the death of all of the priests there, right? And here there's one Egyptian testimony. His witness is going to say that the people that you're pursuing are the ones that burned Ziklag and have your families, which brings us then down to verse. And he says, I'll show you where they are. The Egyptian says, I'll show you where they are. And then in verse 16, and when he had brought him down, behold, they were spread abroad on all the earth. That is, you can imagine, in my mind's eye when I was a kid, they're up in the mountain, so to speak. They're looking down in the valley, and here's all these Amalekites, and they have just had a wonderful raiding party. They've taken all this people, slaves and oxen and herds, and they're rich because they have taken this from the areas that they've raided. So they're having this great celebration. I mean, they went from poor to rich, so to speak, after this. It says, and when they had brought him down, behold, they were spread abroad upon all the earth, eating and drinking and dancing because of the great spoil that was taken out of the land of the Philistines. And let's see. Let's see if are you still here? I just lost my, hang on a second. Let me see if I can get it back here. There we go. There we go. Okay, I trust everything went. This happened to me before, and I'm not exactly sure how it, but a little glitch there. Maybe you didn't see it, which is fine. All right, so let's get back. So they find the Amalekites and they're celebrating because of this great spoil because they have spoiled the Philistines, which is interesting because we hear about the Israeli Philistine conflict and the tension between them, but here the Amalekites just raid everybody wherever there's a weak spot. All right, the Philistines are just as burned up with the Amalekites as anybody else. David's the one that's going to do the work here. They said. He said because they had raided the land of the Philistines and out of the land of Judah. So both out of Judah and Philistines, these are equal opportunity raiders. Okay, the Amalekites. Wherever there's a weak spot, they're going in and taking it. This is the epoch of time in which they lived. It's hard to really get your head around this, but this is the way the nations there in the ancient Near East functioned. Okay, you have Israel, which is a nation, has a capital in Jerusalem, and you have the Philistine Empire that has the 5 primary cities there along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. So you have these empires or these actual nations. Then you have these nomad raiders that are also have a part in this. It says, and David smote them from the twilight even unto the evening of the next day. So all day and all night, all right, he is killing Amalekites. He's going down with his 400 men, and he's doing what David does. Okay, he's a warrior, he's a general, he's a leader of men. And it says, from the twilight even unto the evening of the next day, and there escaped not a man of them, save 400 young men which rode upon camels and fled. I think it's interesting there. 400 escaped, but there was only 400 men that went down. This crew of David is remarkable because as many men escaped as David had to fight them all. All right, and it tells them they were on camels, so they made an escape, and David did not pursue these 400, but he gets everything back, and it tells us this, verse 18, and David recovered all that the Amalekites had. Up here it says you're going to recover all in verse 8, and David recovered all that the Amalekites had in verse 18. That they had carried away. David rescued his 2 wives, okay, his family, and there was nothing lacking to them, neither small nor great. That is, the promise was everything was going to be returned, and that's the miracle of this. Everything is returned. And there was nothing lacking to them, neither small nor great, neither sons nor daughters, neither spoil, nor anything that had been taken to them. David recovered all. There it is. That is remarkable. The promise was you're going to get it all back, and after the battle was over, everything was returned. All the property, all the family members, children, wives, servants, everything. Everybody's alive, and they're all going to be rescued here by David. And David took all the flocks and the herds which they drave before those other cattle and said, this is David's spoil. You can imagine it's not just what they took from Ziklag, but the other Philistine towns that were raided, the towns in Judah that were raided. I mean, what David comes back with is a lot of stuff. All right, after this, that's why the Amalekites were having this big party, because this is a trove or a treasure trove for them. But David gets it all now because of the victory that he's won. And then you have verses 21 through 25. And that whole passage is what I suggested earlier. This is where there was the argument. He calls them the sons of Belial. He said in verse 22, then answered all the wicked men, the men of Belial, of those that went with David, and said, because they went not with us, that is the 200 that stayed at the brook Bezor, because they were too weak to go into the battle. The 400, he says, which are wicked men that are following David. He said, because they went not with us, we will not give them out of the spoil that we have recovered, save to every man his wife and his children, that they may lead them away and depart. That is, they weren't good for the fight. We're going to give them their families back, but they don't get any of the spoil, and they can just take a hike, essentially what these guys are saying. And David's saying that's not going to happen that way, guys. This David is going to stand up to all these men. He says, then said David, ye shall not do so, my brethren, with that which the Lord hath given us, because what we have here is because of the victory of the Lord. Because for David and 400 men to win the victory, is God said he was going to win the victory, but what a victory it would have been against these Amalekite raiders. He said, The Lord has given us, who hath preserved us and delivered the company that came against us into our hand. David knows after he invoked the name of God and they went into battle that the victory was the Lord's. And you think that they recovered everything. You see, I don't think anybody as they went into this, well, David was told they were going to deliver all, but for these men of Belial, the chances that they would believe that they got everything back without any damages like that, he said that's probably not going to happen. But God said it did. It's going to. David believed it. He went after it. And he said the victory is the Lord's. I mean, we did the fighting, but the Lord said we were going to get it all back. And so no, you're not going to subdivide the spoil like you just give the people like what that was theirs and then just send them away. No, that's not going to happen. He said, ye shall not do so. He said, for who will hearken unto you in this matter? But as his part is that goeth down to battle, so shall his part be that tarrieth by the stuff. They shall part alike. Doesn't matter if they stayed by the luggage or whether or not they went into battle. Everybody gets his fair share. I've always thought about that. How does everybody get their fair share after this? I mean, how do you divvy up among 600 guys, cattle and property and spoil, wealth, riches that you've taken from other towns? Commodities. I mean, if there's wagons of grain, how does this all divided? But in these days, I mean, because this was a usual thing that they did. I mean, I'm sure they had this down to a fine art of what was equitable when you would start dividing things up. He says, and it was so from that day forward, and this is the point, that they made a statute and an ordinance for Israel unto this day. That it wasn't just David's idea with the 600 men. This turns out to be the law of warfare when it comes to David and his army. Whether or not you were actually on the front doesn't mean that the benefit of the victory only goes to the warriors, all right? Because there's always those behind the lines. Even in our war, I mean, you have those behind the lines. You have those that are supply trains bringing supplies to the troops. You have your medical staff behind the line. There's a lot of people engaged in the battle that are not up in the front doing the fighting, but are very, very important. And that turns out to be the way because of this principle that David, that the nation of Israel treated their military when they went to battle. So, and then it says this, in verse 26 to 31, I love this stuff. Because David he's going to be the king. He's a great warrior, but he's also a politician. He is a very smart guy. He's brilliant. He's brilliant in every way. Okay, he can lead men. He can take care of guys that are giving him trouble. He says, no, we're not going to do that. Everybody gets their fair share. He trusts God in it. Before he goes to battle, he asks God what to do. God blesses him with the Egyptian to point the path. The victory is his because God enables it. And here at the end of this chapter, what David does is remarkable because he's loaded now. He's got spoil from Judah. He's got spoil from the Philistines. He's got the stuff that was all his, which is now returned. All right. So he's loaded for bear right now with all kinds of things. So it tells us this, beginning in verse 26. And when David came to Ziklag, he sent of the spoil unto the elders of Judah. Of the things that he recovered, he sends gifts to the leaders of Judah. Now, can you imagine what Saul was thinking? When David is an outlaw and he's being chased by the king, but shows up on your front step, so to speak, all this spoil that David just won from the Philistines and from Judah, and now it's on the front porch of the elders of Israel. Say, hey, where did that come from? Where did that come from? That's a gift from David. He was having a good day raiding. It was from the Amalekite raid, and he just wants to have you the benefit from the victory. So he's just thinking about you. He wants you to benefit from the victory. And so here is a herd of cows, okay, or whatever. You're looking outside, you say, hey, the elders of Israel say, man, he's a pretty good guy. Like, he's thinking about us, all right? And it goes on. He says, unto the elders of Israel, even to his friends. As soon as I see friends here, I'm thinking Jonathan. Jonathan at his house turns up with all this stuff, all right? And everybody else that had benefited David, all right? He says, saying, behold, a present for you of the spoil of the enemies of the Lord. It's just a present, all right? But this is going to go a long ways, okay? It's getting him on the right trajectory for having the political support he's going to need as the king. He's already thinking about this. All right, we only have one more chapter in 1 Samuel, and the next chapter is the death of Saul, and then the way's been made now for David to take the throne. But anyway, it doesn't happen right away, but the process is in place. So he's got the spoil, and it says, to them which were in Bethel, and to them which were in South Ramoth, and to them which are in Jair. He's sending gifts to all these folks. And to them which were in Aor, and to them which were in Sipmoth, and to them that were in Eshtemoa. All these folks would have been of some benefit to David sometime along here, and he wanted to thank them for their care and protection of him and his men while he's on the run from Saul. And to whom that were in Rachel, and to them which are in the cities of Jerahmeelites, and to them which were the cities of the Kenites, right? We mentioned that before. And to them which were in Hormah, and to those which are in Korashan, and to them which are in Ethak. So he's sending spoil to all his friends and all to the elders of Israel. He wants to make sure he's on the right side of all these guys, and it was a great spoil. It tells us here. All right, there was a lot of stuff. All right, so he can send a lot of stuff away and still benefit himself. I mean, he's thinking. He's not just hoarding. He's utilizing the victory and the spoil of the victory to advance the future. All right, because he's just a really, really smart guy. It says, and then it says in verse 31, and to them which were in Hebron, and to all the places where David himself and his men were wont to haunt. And that is what we know, where he used to hide out, and people would look after him. Now we know the Ziphites, they weren't on his side. Nothing is going to Ziph here, right? The Ziphites were always telling on him. But there were those that aided David because they knew David was the good guy. They knew Saul was out of the Lord's will. And wherever he was aided, wherever he hung out, wherever people provided food and shelter for him and his men, where were there those that came alongside him and aided him or warned him Saul is coming or let him, information could be transferred back and forth. There's all these towns here where the Bible doesn't say very much about any of this other than the fact that these folks were his friends. These unspoken people that lived in these towns were his friends because they helped his men and him while he was on the run from Saul, which I just think is an amazing thing. So he didn't forget about his friends is the point. He didn't forget about his friends. He knew it. And when he had the capacity, the ability to reward them or to help them along, he did it. And he used the spoil here that had been taken from these places. And it may be, too, because it doesn't say where they raided in Judah, that he returned things to the people where it had been taken. He didn't just give other people of Judah's stuff to somebody else, but that he gave it back to them. So the loss, if you can imagine that, because you know you've lost it, and then you say, well, it's gone. I mean, what are we going to do? I'm thankful that I'm alive. And then you see somebody coming back with your cows and your maybe your family members, right? Whatever. And you say, I thought you were forever lost. And it says, compliments of David. You won a great victory, and you want to make sure everybody got home safe. See, it's wonderful. Wonderful story. All right. That is chapter 30 of 1 Samuel. And a famous story. And then we have 31, which is it's just a terrible event. I've been reminding you ever since we started this. This is the death of Saul, the death of Jonathan. It's a terrible, terrible story, but Saul, in some capacity, has to be off the scene for David to take the throne. It happens at the hand of the Philistines. Lord willing, we'll do this tomorrow. But it's good to be back. It's always good to be home. Good to see everybody. Share this with others. We're getting lots of views. I mean, the Lord is blessing this. There's no doubt about it. So I'm not a big salesman, but viewership is up and subscribers are up. And so we just thank the Lord for this. And if you if there's any comments, include that. Well, the Lord bless you. Have a great day, and Lord willing, I will see everybody tomorrow. All right, we'll see you.